thank you for coming on the podcast. The reason I wanted to have you on today is you're in a unique situation.
Mm-hmm.
You're a manufacturer, among other things, as
Yep.
well as you're located in Shenzhen, China. And you're also English-speaking Australian.
Yes.
I feel like there's not many people that are in that situation in China. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but
I mean, there's not a whole lot. I mean, there used
Yeah.
to be more. I think before COVID, there was a lot
Mm.
more, definitely foreigners and stuff. But there's definitely a few like Europeans and Americans and stuff in Shenzhen, and still quite a few. But yeah, definitely in a very unique position. That's for sure.
Yeah. Anyway, so to start off, I just would like you to give a brief explanation of your professional history and maybe what exposure you've had to the design industry in your time.
Sure. So, it goes back. So I used to actually be a graphic designer back in the day, working in advertising and design many years ago, and sort of segued into technology through a web hosting company I started, because at the time the web was only like a brand new thing, kind of showing my age here. And and so we had customers asking us to build websites, and we're like, sure, we can figure it out. So in the beginning it was a mix of like Dreamweaver and hand-coded HTML, but we were doing the design and then we were building it, and then it's like we need somewhere to host it. So we started a hosting company, and one thing led to another that became more successful than the design business, and then we kind of stopped doing the design stuff, and then the hosting business grew, and it was like, okay, now we need to become a real business, and we need a telephone system. So there was no real kind of small business oriented phone systems on the market. So I started another company, and we built our very own kind of small sits on your desk telephone system, and so that was kind of the first mass-produced product that we kind of got to market. And so that was definitely an interesting experience, kind of going to China, back in the early 2000s, when things were very different to what they are now. And because only 50 years ago Shenzhen was a fishing village. It's kind of insane now. There's like 27 million people living in Shenzhen, and it's a thriving metropolis of just kind of feels like something out of the future.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my first foray into like a physical product, and then it just kind of grew from there. So experience and time, and then just developing more products along the way. So
yeah, that's great. Do you see your role as a manufacturer as well as in manufacturing as a whole changing in the coming years?
I think so. I mean, as a whole, I mean, over the last 10 years, manufacturing has definitely changed like a lot. So especially with the advent of additive manufacturing, I think that has definitely helped in terms of bringing products to market at a much faster rate. Because 10 years ago, you couldn't really do high quality 3D prints without spending $500,000 on a like industrial 3D printer that would take forever and cost an absolute fortune to run. But nowadays, like, I can get stuff printed out of titanium, stainless steel, like you name it, the materials, and make super complicated geometries that you couldn't make with any other manufacturing method. So it's definitely changed, and it's also kind of sped up. And I think it's only going to get kind of more advanced and faster as we go, because that sort of new technologies and things always developing, and it just kind of completely changes the landscape. So,
do you see additive manufacturing becoming the prominent manufacturing method in the future?
I don't think so. I think it will definitely be something to supplement, because I've seen a lot of the big boutique car manufacturers, for example, that make really low volume handmade cars that are selling for like $4 or $5 million. Those guys are using additive manufacturing because it makes sense. So in the case of Koenigsegg in Sweden, like 3D prints a titanium exhaust. Like you couldn't really do that at the scale that they're at, even though they're a big company and in making hundreds of millions. They're not at the scale of like a Volkswagen, where they're producing like a million parts and that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
so,
the volume's very low.
Yeah, so it poses an interesting opportunity for, I think, niches. There's some things where I think the additive manufacturing can definitely help, but I don't think we're at the stage yet where it's going to be the manufacturing method, because I mean, for example, if you compare an injection molded part to a 3D printed part, you can't compete. Like I could churn out an injection molded part every 30 seconds, and or 20 of them, in the one mold, but to print that one part might take me an hour. Obviously there's tooling costs and all the rest of it, but when it comes to additive manufacturing, I still think we're pretty far away from that.
Okay. Do you perceive mass adoption of 3D printing affecting the need for large-scale manufacturing? You kind of already answered this, but do you think it's going to?
I think large-scale manufacturing is always going to be there because, like I said, 3D printing is not at that scale yet, and I don't know that it will be. It's like I mentioned with the injection molding, you just can't beat that volume and scale, and that's why injection molding is still used. Like with anything made of plastic, it's injection molded. I think for small runs, potentially, yes, it makes more sense. You can do, but then there's other things you can do, like you can do silicon molding, so you can basically make a small silicon mold and urethane cast a part, and it looks like a finished injection molded part. So there's you can use 3D printing to its strengths, but I definitely don't think it's going to replace like large scale manufacturing anytime soon.
I think it will be interesting in the future, like, as consumer grade 3D printing becomes more and more available and better and better. Maybe we'll move down the route where you'll buy kind of a CAD file from an organization and then print a product yourself, and then you don't worry about the time it's going to take.
I mean, there's a lot of companies that are kind of proposing this idea of, instead of manufacturing the products, you basically work with people that have 3D printing infrastructure. So effectively, someone goes to your website, they buy the product, and then they send a job to someone who might be in your area who can 3D print that part, that product, and then send it to you. That's one way I perceive that perhaps there might be, some small scale manufacturing might work like that. I worked with a company that tried to do that with a lighting system, where you would basically order the light to, like, it's a modular lighting system for offices. The idea would be that you can say, okay, well, I want one for a room this big, and it might take 50 modules. So the idea would be when someone orders it, it would find the closest person to them in the network that could print it. They'll print the parts and then send them on the plastic, ready to go, kind of thing.
Then it takes away the transport distance.
Yeah, I mean, but then you still got to send them the electronics and stuff. And
and then there's the intellectual property argument, which could be an issue.
But there's been some advent of like conductive filaments, so you can use it to replace wires, and we did some testing with that. But it's good for low current stuff. As soon as you start getting into high current, it just melts and becomes a mess. So,
what barriers do exist between manufacturers and designers, and how can we work to weaken them?
That's an interesting question. So, I mean, it really depends, because in the context of whether you're a designer in the sense of an individual working with a manufacturer, or you're working through a company, dealing with a middleman that deals with the manufacturer, there's like so many different parts that so I think the biggest thing is communication, and making sure that you both understand what the end goal of what it is that you're trying to do. Not only that, you need to understand sorry, my brain's not working today. I'm trying to find the word. Basically the weaknesses and strengths of that particular manufacturer when it comes to making the part. So maybe there's something they can do, some things they can't do. So it's really both parties having a full understanding of, like, the designer will always want to do this and this and everything, but the reality is you can't. So you've got to find like the middle ground of, hey, how can we do this but do it reliably and make sure that we fit within the requirements of what the manufacturer can actually do. Because I think a big problem with design is always that design for manufacture aspect, and that's a thing that a lot of people skip. They just like design a part and expect to be able to make it, and that's just so far from the actual truth. There's a lot of consideration into design for manufacturers, such as like what material, like what manufacturing method. In the case of when you're talking about metal and maybe you're going to machine a part, you need to know, well, what particular kind of metal are we using, and what are the strengths and weaknesses of that part. You need to understand like the actual physical strength and weakness of the part. Like, okay, if we take out material here, is it going to stress the part? What's your factor of safety of the part? Is it a factor of 2? Is it 5? Is it 10? Like, what are you working at? So it's really understanding those requirements and being able to both communicate that on both sides, from not only design, but the manufacturer, to make sure that, you know, everyone understands, okay, this is what we can do and this is what we can't do. Because I think a lot of that gets lost in you know, the excitement of, hey, I'm bringing a product to market. You know, this is, I'm going to get to see it in my hands. It's sort of, sometimes you forget about those other things.
Is that something that you are noticing designers are lacking these days, that idea of manufacturing capabilities?
Yeah, I think a lot of designers, I mean, it's interesting because the time we're in now is that, like, there's so much information available on, like, YouTube, and everywhere you go you can learn about things, but the thing is that you're learning from the right people, you know what I mean? So someone might give you some bad information and you take that and run with it, but it's actually wrong, and you end up, like, completely fucking up something, excuse my language, but, you know, so I think it's really important to actually go and physically see stuff being made. I think that's a really important thing that a lot of designers don't get to do.
It's quite hard to learn from a book sometimes about, like,
it really is, like, with anything, you know. I'm always of the belief that it should be hands-on. You should always learn hands-on. Like go to a machine shop and just say, can I work here for a day? Don't pay me, but like, I want to, like, you know, understand how all of this works, and I want to get a feel for it, because I think that'll do two things. One, it'll give you a bit more of an understanding, but two, it'll give you a bit of excitement. That's the most important thing, is, like, you need to understand, you know, how it all goes together, but then actually seeing something is, like, it's pretty awesome. Like, I still get every time I watch CNC stuff, you know.
I remember when you sent me those CNC videos when we were working on that project, and, like, I was just like, oh, this is the craziest thing. The noise it was making as well. It's just like,
it's not even, I mean, there's like 100 CNC machines in that shop. It doesn't matter.
It's funny. One of my previous guests, Neil, he was telling me when he first started off, he was going to random manufacturers in Brisbane and just bringing, like, a slab of beer and being like, I'll give you this slab of beer if you teach me how to, like.
Absolutely, I mean, that's the Aussie way to do it. Turn up the slab. But yeah, look, I seriously think, you know, learning by doing is the best way. That's in my book. And I think, you know, gain as much experience as you can by, like, meeting other people and finding people in the similar industry that have been doing it for a long time, and learn what you can, because I think that the more you can better yourself, the better you become as overall, you know, because, you know, design has so many different facets. Like, you know, there's the design part of it, but then there's also like I said, the design for manufacture. How do you take that design and how do you make a million of them reliably?
The scalability as well.
That's such an important skill that I think a lot of designers lack. Like, you see so many Kickstarter projects where people like, hey, yeah, we've got this design. It's like, okay, have you done, like, a batch run of it? It's like, no. You know, we've got some 3D printed prototypes and stuff and this and that, but it's really something that I think people need to spend a lot more time and effort, and, you know, come to China, go visit factories, like, all that sort of stuff. That's the way to do it, you know.
I think that is the problem with specifically industrial design, is, like, it's so broad now that it's really hard to, like, find where to, like, put your time to get better at things. Like, with some, like, disciplines, like even graphic design, like, I feel like it's pretty clear the things you need to focus on, like, you know, being good at visual communication and, like, learning the software, like, things like that. But, like, industrial design, you can go, like, anywhere from, like, being a machinist to, like, sketching and to, like, anything really. Even, like, VR now, like, you can just, there's so many things to learn. It's kind of overwhelming, but also, like, really interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
Are there any skills or even perspectives that designers should adopt to help strengthen the bridge between manufacturers and designers? So you mentioned the design for manufacturer.
Yeah, I mean, design for manufacturer is, like, probably one of the most important skills you can have, and I think, you know, that goes back to what I was saying about, you know, learning and understanding, you know, the manufacturing process. Like, that's a really important part, because every manufacturing process has different things you need to be aware of. Like, when you're talking about plastic parts, you need to consider draft angles, wall thicknesses. You need to consider ribbing, because a lot of the times, you know, you'll have a nice part, it'll come out of the mold, and it starts warping. It's like, okay, as it cooled down, it's warped because we don't have any ribbing. We need to add some ribbing to the part to make it structurally strength. So there's a lot of things that you can learn, like, you know, by understanding the manufacturing method. And so I think that's like I keep saying, you know, it's just such an important skill to have, and I think the best way to do it is to go and physically see these things happening, you know. it's a bit hard in Oz. There's not so many, injection molding places and CNC
Not
machines.
to the scale, at least, of China.
Yeah, I mean the scale here is it just boggles my mind still that you can get things made at such incredible scale. Like, I mean, I went into the Apple Watch factory and that thing just blew my mind. There's a room about 1 kilometer long just full of CNC machines spitting out tiny parts that I would hate to be one of those guys that dropped one of those parts because they're so small you would never find it. And then there's another room where they're like welding them all together and polishing them, and it's just the scale is just incredible, and it really, still blows my mind to this day.
To what level is automation present within your organization?
We use automation where it makes sense. So, where we can optimize manufacturing processes, we'll use automation. But I think it depends on what it is you're doing, because automation, like if you take a look at Tesla, for example, when they brought out the Model 3, they tried to go 100% automation, and that was a huge failure. That caused them all kinds of problems, because at the end of the day, someone needs to maintain the robots, right? So there's always going to need to be someone. And so I think automation is best used where it makes sense for repetitive tasks and things where, people might get fatigued over time, like putting in screws or picking up a part and moving it here. Like, we use robotic arms with injection molding machines. So the injection molding machine finishes, it opens, robotic arm comes in, takes the part out, and then next part, same. And then it goes on a conveyor belt and then goes into, the assembly line. So, there's other parts, like when it comes to wheel manufacturing, we use a lot of automation there just because it makes sense. The big thing with making wheels is, you need to, once you mix the polyurethane, you need to be careful about how that's poured into the molds. And so we use automation there to make sure that it's done consistently. Because if someone's having to pour it and moving molds around and stuff, there's more chance to introduce air.
So for accuracy level as well.
Yeah, so I mean, there's some places where it makes sense, and then there's some places where it just doesn't. Especially when it comes to really small parts, it's still better to get humans to do that stuff, because robots don't have the dexterity that we have. We can move our hands in such a way that a robot still cannot replicate. But I think there's, when it comes to logistics and shipping, I think automation should be used where you can, because moving heavy stuff, like the less you rely on humans, the better it is for everyone, because people hurt their backs, people get tired. You can't expect a person to work a 15-hour shift in a warehouse lifting stuff all the time. It's better to use robots to either assist or replace.
Do you think it'll move to a point where warehouses are not warehouses, manufacturers and warehouses are completely automated?
No, I think we're far from that. I mean, I know there's like, Xiaomi, Tesla, and all these guys are building like AI bots, like physical bots. And I still don't think those will be anywhere near replacing humans, because I think there's still that tactile, like touch, smell, and feel that we have that robots can't replicate.
The big problem with AI now is its ability to like understand and survey an area, right? Because humans just passively perceive everything now. Whereas like one thing they've realized is that like AI it's very hard to get a robot to perceive everything around it.
You have to train it on a set of data, so you've got to constantly be like telling it, hey, you've got to learn this. So I think eventually that we'll get to a point where there's definitely like humans and robots working together side by side. I mean, we already do now in like, car factories. You've got robots basically stamping parts, taking parts, putting it together, welding it, all the rest of it, and then humans, putting in seats and all the rest of it. So there's always going to be that sort of bridge between the two. But I think I'm skeptical that we're going to get there, that it's 100%. I mean, maybe some like sectors you might be able to do that, but I think for the vast majority, I think we're probably going to still rely maybe 50 to 60% on humans, and maybe some of the rest of it can be robots.
I think it's like it's just hard to know where to predict now. Like ChatGPT just kind of came out of nowhere, and like even like 2 years ago you had DALL-E.
It's been something in the works for a while.
But it just
it's pretty insane. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I was messing around with it yesterday, and I made it write 3,000 word blogs for me in like a few seconds, and it's just like, Jesus Christ. I mean, but it's still not there yet. Like, there's still a lot of mistakes and things that it makes, and but you know, these things improve over time. With, you know, the more data it sees, the smarter it becomes, and all the rest. But then it's kind of like, well, it feels like that's taking away from like the skill of people that write and that have those skills. And so I think, you know, yeah, I'm not 100% into the whole AI thing. I think, you know, it's probably going to be the end of us at some point.
I'm not convinced either, but I just think it's scary how quickly it sped up in the last couple of years. Like, we had like DALL-E, and then now there's just ChatGPT. Like, what's next? Like, fully autonomous robot.
Well, yeah, I mean, you combine, you know, ChatGPT with the ability to see and understand the world and what's going on, and connect it to the internet, and suddenly you've got like a you know, sentient being almost. It's kind of terrifying.
Well, Bing's connected ChatGPT to the internet now, right? Like, I'm
not
pretty
sure. It's still not fully connected. I mean, ChatGPT itself is not connected, but I'm sure you can, like, using the APIs and stuff, you can probably build something to do that. But yeah, it's still kind of terrifying.
Have you seen the thing where it's starting to become like, well, arguably sentient, and it's having like cool, like, you know, I don't know,
I wouldn't say it's sentient. It's just that it's like it's trained on such data, like such vast amounts of data, and you know, the more you use it, the smarter it becomes. So it's the perception of being sentient, but it's still not there yet. But I mean, you know, it's a terrifying thought to the one day it may become sentient, and then we have, you know,
there's the argument that like you wouldn't even know if it became, well, sentient, or whatever the term you'd like to use, because there's like the new version of the Turing test that the Chinese made, I'm pretty sure. And like they're saying that like they wouldn't even know, because they don't know like how it produces the results it produces, because it's like creating it all behind the scenes. So like they wouldn't know actually if it is sentient, because they wouldn't know how the result was created. So
it's I mean, this whole uncharted territory is kind of terrifying. And then, you know, eventually people will use that in military applications, and then it's like, you know, the robots make decisions about who to kill. That's the really terrifying part of it.
This got very dark very quickly.
Yeah, sorry.
Do you believe as automation continues to evolve, we will reach a point where designers will interface directly with an AI-like system, and then we would carry out required manufacturing processes, as opposed to having someone like yourself or like an interface?
I don't think 100%, but I think that potentially we'll get to a point where it can be like, hey, I want to make this part, and then you could feed it through an AI, which could do some DFM checks to say, hey, we can do this, we can do that, we can't do this, and then make some suggestions as to what to change or things like that. But I'm not sure that we'll get 100%, just because, you know, when it comes to making parts, there's just so many variables, and I think it would be really difficult to try to train some kind of AI system on knowing all of that, because there's just so many unknowns. You know, like you might make a part, and then, like I said, you know, you might not have ribbing in a certain area, or you might need more wall thickness, you might get sink marks here and there, and trying to train an AI to understand that is going to be a pretty monumental task. I mean, maybe it can do 10 to 20% of you know, what to look for, but I think we're going to be far away from that.
Especially with all the different manufacturing processes as well, all the variables.
And like, you know, if you're putting together a finished product, it might have 100 different discrete parts, and each one has a different manufacturing method, and you know, tolerance between the parts, between the different manufacturing methods. Just so many variables. I think you still need someone that's like experienced with knowing how to do this stuff and putting it all together to really make informed decisions.
Currently manufacturing is dominated by China. Is this a reality that you see to continue into the foreseeable future?
It's not going to change anytime soon. I can tell you, like, it's not. The thing is, a lot of people misunderstand China. It's not labor cost. It's got nothing to do with labor cost. It's that, I mean, Tim Cook said it pretty well recently. He said, I would happily make stuff in America, right? But when it comes to making parts for Apple have very complicated like tooling requirements for their parts. So if Apple wanted to have a meeting in America with like really skilled tooling engineers, right, they could probably get 4 people, right? You did the same thing in China, you could fill 4 football fields with tooling engineers.
It isn't the supplier.
It's not to do with cost. It's not to do with any of that. It's just mainly to do with skill. And there are so many people that are skilled at doing so many things here that it's just, it would take years, at least 10 to 20 years for anyone else to catch up. And even then, it'd still be 10 to 20 years behind where China is. Like most people don't understand the incredible scale at which China works. Like there's everyone's time and then there's China's time. Like China moves at such a rapid pace. It is just, it blows my mind. Like I remember when I first came to Shenzhen in like, what was it, like 4 or 5 years ago, being in Shenzhen, and where I was living, I could see this like skyscraper being constructed. And when I first moved in, it was like down here. And every morning I would check out and I would see it just incredible progress. And after 6 months, it was finished.
And then here you get like some random roadworks and it's going for like 4 years.
Yeah, I mean things.
You're like, what are they doing?
Happen here at a scale that's just nobody can really fathom. And not only that, like China builds robots to build, well, not robots, but build tools to build what they need to. So, for example, I don't know if you've seen, they've got this bridge building robot, which is basically this giant, you could call it a truck, car, whatever you want to call it, that can basically take segments of the bridge. It moves itself onto the pylon and then locks itself in and then moves the next section of bridge across and then drops it in place and then moves across, goes onto the next pylon, and it lays the bridge. Like it's insane. And so, China's very good at figuring out problem solving, and that's to do with skill. Like education is a really big thing here. Like there's a lot of focus on the STEM education, like getting people into becoming engineers and all the rest of it. And so I think, it's going to be very hard for anyone else to compete with China. Despite what everybody says about all this geopolitical nonsense, like put all that shit aside, like everyone needs China. Like it's just a fact.
They have too much of a competitive advantage right now.
Well, it's just you can't do it anywhere else. I mean, Apple tried to do some stuff with the iPhones in India, right? But the problem is all those parts are made in China and then shipped to India to do final assembly. But the stuff that's being made in India is just not up to scratch. Like 1 out of every 3 is okay.
Yeah.
And that's a terrible, terrible rate to be scrapping at a volume of Apple. And so I think, it just comes down to skill set. It comes down to the pool of talent that you have available here. Like if I need 100 engineers, I could get 100 engineers tomorrow. Like, you can't do that anywhere else. There's people willing to work. And that's is, there's just, you see in Oz and American stuff, people like, oh, there's no one's willing to work. And that's it, because people are generally lazy these days. Unfortunately, things like social media and influencers and stuff has made people fucking lazy, like really fucking lazy, excuse my language. But
I feel like as well, when like you have such a high minimum wage, especially in Australia, like people just get kind of stuck in like base level jobs that can continue like at a pretty decent level.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's not really that like need to elevate yourself.
Yeah. It's it's kind of sad. I mean, I really wish, many years ago I tried to set up some manufacturing stuff in Oz, and we had some grants and all of that was like locked in. We had $1 million grant with Commercialization Australia, and then suddenly like the government changed and Commercialization Australia was gone, and I'm like, hey, where's our check? So we don't exist anymore. So I've definitely tried to do things in terms of manufacturing in Oz. It's just not feasible. But also nobody wants to do it. If you go to a local machine shop and say, hey, can you make this part for me? No one will get back to you. Like you could email 50 companies and no one will get back to you.
Yeah, then the Chinese manufacturers, they just constantly message
you. Email someone here and they'll be like, hey, let's do it. Here's a quote. Let's go ahead.
Yeah.
I'll make a sample for free. Like you just don't get that anywhere else. And I think it's, you have to actually come to China to fully understand like everything about China, because the media likes to make China out to be this evil country, but it's just so not. Like Chinese people are friendliest, like most awesome people, and like all all our suppliers and stuff who regularly go out and have drinks and eat and all this stuff, you know, we become good friends with them, and so we develop good working relationships, and that's really what it's about at the end of the day, you know.
Yeah, I think it's like it's a bit of a political strategy in the West to kind of try and undermine Chinese.
Well, it is because, you know, I don't want to get into geopolitics, but like America's been in decline for a while, and you know, it's all to do with the US dollar, and you know, it's it's just it's a mess, and you know, everyone's trying to like put down China because they don't want to, because China's going to become the #1 economy in the world pretty soon. Like they're probably already at that point, but it's and people are terrified of that because it's like, shit, we're no longer the #1. I mean, America hasn't been #1 for a long time. I mean, they've just let themselves go basically long ago. And you know, I don't want to get into geopolitics. That's not what this is about. But at the end of the day, it's like, you know, China is growing at just a phenomenal rate, and it's not slowing down. If anything, you know, Xi Jinping had this Made in China 2025 policy, which is like, hey, let's build our own technology. Let's really like ramp it up. And so in the last kind of 3 or 4 years, you've seen this huge progress in just local technology development. Just blows my mind. Even with the trains, like I love catching the high-speed train here. Like I can jump on a train 330 k's an hour. You know, it's just, it feels like you're on a cushion of air. You don't feel bumps, you don't feel anything. I can put a drink on the windowsill and it doesn't shake, it doesn't vibrate. We're doing 330 k's an hour, you know.
Yeah, I went on the bullet trains when I was in Europe, and they're just crazy. We have like the train in Brisbane. I think it goes like 80 kilometers.
And I like, look at, you know, the old red rattlers and stuff, and I'm just like, what the hell are we doing? You know, why are we buying, you know, friggin' $1 billion submarines and stuff? Like, hey, come get China to come and build our railroad infrastructure and put in a high-speed rail. Like, if you put the 330 k an hour train between Sydney and Melbourne, you could do that trip in like 5 hours. Instead, it takes 10 hours, and it's in a terrible. I did that trip a couple of times. I'll never do that ever again. You know, here I caught the train from Sichuan back to Foshan, and it was 8 hours, but it didn't feel like 8 hours because it was so comfortable. You know, you got food on board, you've got Wi-Fi, you've got PowerPoints, like super comfortable chairs, air conditioned. Like it's just so comfortable. It's really, it makes that trip just, sorry, getting off topic.
We spoke about this with one of our other podcast guests as well. He was talking about how basically the government started to realize over COVID that they didn't have the capabilities to actually build any of the things they needed if they were disconnected from, which is, I mean, this was obvious for a long time, but so like apparently there's a move to start bringing like more manufacturing back to Australia, so at least we have like the fundamental skilled manufacturing.
It's not gonna happen, man. It's not, I mean, you know, our car industry got disbanded years ago, but you know, we still pay the subsidies that is meant to be subsidizing the car industry. Like you're still paying that with your road tax and your registration and insurance and all that stuff. It's like you're not meant to pay that now that we don't have a car industry. Why are we still like feeding this money? It's like, it's just crazy stuff. I think a lot of it comes down to like just inefficiency of the political system. There's just too many layers and too many people that want to like write reports on things, write a report on something that we may do like 10 years down the track, you know. We've been talking about high-speed trains for 30 plus years.
They're talking about this train that's going to be built that connects like Brisbane to Gold Coast and then down south. I mean,
I mean,
one last thing on the topic. Do you see the declining birth rates having an effect? I know like US is going to be like pretty screwed by that in the future.
I mean, look, there's been a bit of a decline, but I think, you know,
it'll amp back up.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is to do with COVID. You know, people got sick. I mean, there were definitely a lot more babies born during COVID. I mean, my son was born during COVID time, so there you go. So it's definitely something that I mean, everyone's going to face that at some point, right? Because there's definitely a shift, especially with like, you know, more females are wanting to work, which is great. They're focused on their career, not a problem at all. But I think, you know, it's like people want to put off having a family until later on, and I mean that's fine. But China just recently raised the age of retirement to keep more people in the workforce, which is a good and a bad thing. A lot of people got pissed off about it because they're like, I can't retire now till above 60. So, but
Yeah.
but I think every country is going to have some kind of issue with declining birth rates. I mean, Japan definitely having big problems with that's
Yeah.
always
Already.
there.
Yeah.
I think America maybe, but I think China will be fine. I mean, you've got 1.4 billion people. I think they'll be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the field of manufacturing, what new technologies, what new or emerging technologies are you the most excited about?
That's a good question. I mean, there's so many ways I could answer that. I mean, additive manufacturing stuff is actually pretty interesting, especially with like multi-material printing. So being able to print and fuse different metals together, that's a pretty interesting thing. There's also, I've seen some guys basically will produce a part with a metal 3D printer. They'll basically harden it and then they'll put it in a CNC machine. And so I saw, I think it was Siemens made this machine that does it all in one machine.
Yeah, I saw that machine.
Literally, it prints it, it then hardens it, and then it machines it all in the one machine, which is like crazy. So I think definitely, and I've also seen, for retro cars, where you can't buy parts anymore. I've seen people metal 3D print those parts to replace it. I think that kind of stuff is really neat to keep things alive.
Yeah.
I think in a place like Cuba would be amazing to have metal 3D printing flourish, because they've got like the largest collection of cars from like the 50s and the 40s and stuff, and they're because they've had sanctions from the US, they can't import anything, so all their cars are like old 40s and 50s US cars, and so they can't get access to parts, they can't import things. So Cuba is a really interesting country where they have to like make do, and they're a country of makers and tinkerers, so they like put two cars together that don't meant to go together. They take the back half of one car and the front half of another, make it go. There's some really interesting things. There's some pretty interesting documentaries on Cuba and that kind of aspect of it, especially when it comes to phones. People sell like broken phones and then they use those to fix other people's phones, screens, parts, whatever. I think that's additive manufacturing definitely has interesting aspects, but also not just in making parts, but in like making houses. Low cost houses. That's an interesting aspect of it. I've seen some people use recycled plastic, so turn plastic into bricks. Old scrap waste that ends up in the ocean, turn that into bricks. I don't know how sustainable that is, but I mean, at least it's out of the ocean, and building low cost housing for people. I think that's some interesting. But yeah, the whole manufacturing world is just it boggles my mind just how much it changes on a daily basis, and coming out with something new. There's so many aspects of it. I think additive manufacturing is definitely one of the most exciting areas, just because of what it allows you to do that you couldn't do 10 years ago, even 5 years ago.
I have a resin printer, and the quality of additive resin printing is just insane.
I mean, look at the quality of this. I mean, this is SLA. Oh, you can't see that. Never mind. This is SLA printed, but it feels like a finished part, and the tolerances are
no ley lines. It's just crazy.
There's no ley lines, and the tolerances are like probably about 99% of the actual part. So it's like dimensionally accurate, super stable, like. And so, I think even I've seen a lot of dentists start to use resin printers to basically make molds of people's mouths for Invisalign and all of these other things. So it's definitely used in a lot of places, and it's starting to emerge. Even shoemakers, some people
does the, what are they called? The lattice structure soles.
So stuff like that. It's pretty neat, pretty interesting.
Those hangers you printed, were they on SLA?
Yeah, on a very big, expensive machine.
Yeah, I was like, where are the ley lines? Like, what kind of?
Well, so that one uses lasers and basically resin. So it's a pool of resin, and then it comes out like this. But you can print on those machines like more than 1 meter long in a single piece. Like these are huge industrial.
That's crazy.
So when you walk into the room where it's printing, they've got a special light so that it doesn't cure the UV. like under normal light. It's a yellow light, particular like color, so that it doesn't affect the UV material. So pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, after it comes out, they've got to, it's got to be hand finished, and then it goes into a hardening, and then once it's like UV hardened, then parts ready to go.
Yeah, that thing is insane. It just looks like plastic parts.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of
plastic part, yeah.
And the printer I work with has like probably more than 200 of those machines running 24/7. I'll send them a part, and then the next day I have it.
Yeah,
there's no point in me buying a 3D printer when I can just get them to print anything for me. Like they can print metal, plastic, whatever. We can do nylon, TPU, whatever materials you want. There's like ABS equivalent, or if I want to do something else, they can 3D print a master and then make a silicon mold and then cast that. There's so many things you can do in terms of like, I think the biggest exciting part about additive manufacturing is just the speed in which you can prototype things and bring to the market. Because before, like, many years ago when I was developing some products, we would make a functional model, but it required us to CNC it. And, that I remember costing like 10 grand to make a model of just one finished, part. And it was like, holy crap, this is so expensive.
Do you think it'll get to the point where we have metal printers at commercial grade?
I think we're still a way off because of just the extra processes you need to like harden the metal and all the rest of it. But I think every 5 years the technology kind of gets down from the commercial into like the consumer space, and then prosumer. And I think in the next 5 years we'll start to see more kind of exotic materials and printers that are capable of more things. Yeah, it's
cool.
It's really cool.
I'll start 3D printing my own trucks.
Yeah, nice. I wouldn't ride them though.
Yeah. So with 3D printing, the material strength, like the way the strength is calculated, is it just random, like cast, or is it?
It depends. I mean, with this kind of printing, it's more like a kind of cast part because it's more uniform. And because we're talking like microns between like each layer, and then once it's cured, it becomes like a solid part. So there is the grain structure is kind of, I guess, like fairly random in terms of how it is. But you can use different materials, to depending on what you're wanting to do. So you can use different resins to simulate ABS, or you might want to simulate nylon, or you might want to simulate a glass-filled nylon. Like they're all different materials, and that's another interesting part of like the whole additive manufacturing is that they're just the new materials that come out every day. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
You speak Chinese?
A little bit.
A little bit. Don't you speak fluent? I thought you spoke fluent.
No, I don't speak fluent. Okay. I'm far from fluent.
But sometimes it can be hard communicating with Chinese manufacturers and getting your ideas across and like the specific details. What specific ways do you think you can improve that relationship with a non-English speaking, or maybe maybe like a minimal English speaking Chinese manufacturer?
I mean, I would learn the language as much as you can. That's the best thing, or find someone that speaks the language and that can help you. I have people in my team that speak fluent Mandarin, Cantonese, so I speak and understand enough to kind of get me into trouble. But I'm far from fluent. I'm still learning every day. It's a really difficult language. But yeah, I think having at least a basic understanding of the language, like of the most important words, like numbers and things like that, will definitely help to kind of help with that relationship. That I think the Chinese supplier will probably look at you a little bit differently if you're speak just a little bit of Chinese. It might definitely change their perspective on you. Because in a lot of cases, when you're dealing with guys on Alibaba, those are the guys that only deal with export customers, right? So in most cases, you're paying probably 20 to 30% more than you should if you're dealing directly with the manufacturer themselves. So I think, definitely try and get a grasp of the language as much as you can, and there's plenty of apps out there to kind of help you learn and understand Chinese. But yeah, otherwise, find a supplier that speaks English as well as you can, and kind of hold on to them.
How do you recommend finding a manufacturer if you're if you're like a designer or an organization that isn't through Alibaba?
Yeah, that's I mean, there's a Chinese version of Alibaba. It's 1688, Yao Lu Baba, that's why it's 1688, because it sounds like Alibaba in Chinese.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, you can either find like a sourcing agent, someone that's on the ground in China that can help you. Typically, you're gonna have to pay a little bit extra because they're obviously adding their markup to it, or search around, look online, try and find direct manufacturers, because a lot of companies will be a trading company, so they're not actually the manufacturer.
Yep.
They'll be like a middleman that'll deal with the manufacturer. So in some cases, especially when it comes to things like tooling, you want to be really careful there, because you technically aren't really owning the tool, the trade company does. So depending on what you're making and what you're doing, you want to make sure you research those suppliers first. I mean, Alibaba is a good starting point, and then you can kind of try and negotiate with them a little. But yeah, whoever you're dealing with, make sure you're dealing with the actual manufacturer.
Yeah. As far as copyright, obviously, or the lack thereof, how do you navigate that?
There's not really a lack thereof. I think it's a general misunderstanding, is that, typically, foreign patents and trademarks don't really hold any value in China.
Yep.
But Chinese patents and trademarks do.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
So the thing is to protect yourself with a Chinese patent and Chinese trademarks.
Yep.
Because that's really what matters more. Like I always tell people, forget having a US patent, forget having a like European or Australian patent. If you want to patent something, do it in China.
Yeah.
Because 9 times out of 10, it's going to be made in China. So you want to protect yourself, protect yourself where everything's made, because that's really where you can protect yourself. And I mean, the other thing you can do is try not to give your finished whole design to one company. Just give one particular part to one supplier and another part to another, so no one ever sees the finished. That's the way to do it. But it's not really as much of an issue like it used to be. I mean, there's definitely, you can still get, these are like 1-to-1 copies of the AirPods that function exactly the same, and my iPhone thinks they're real AirPod Maxes, but they cost $100. So definitely there's that culture in Shenzhen called Shenzhen, which is basically improving upon things. There's a lot of that happens in China. So I mean, they take things they see and then they make them better. That's the Shenzhen way of basically improving on products. So
okay.
And then there's also people that will just straight up copy Apple stuff.
Yeah. And then sell them for a fraction of the price, probably the actual price they're meant to be.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say these sound exactly the same as the real AirPods and function the same too. It's kind of terrifying.
Do you see rising sustainability concerns and regulations reshaping how global manufacturing operates?
I think sustainability definitely, and environmental impact is something that everybody kind of has to take thought of, because I think at the end of the day, we have one planet. We're going to kind of do our best to try not to pollute as much as we can, and I think a big thing that a lot of designers don't take into account is the life cycle of a product. Because you need to factor in, especially when it comes to what materials you're using and things that go into the finished product, how will this product break down at the end of its life cycle? That's a big thing that I think a lot of people just don't think about. Especially when it comes to you use plastic, you can't really recycle it unless you're using a recyclable plastic, but then you can't really use that in a product. It's more for drink bottles and stuff, PET plastic. But yeah, there's just so many aspects of it and things that go into you need to definitely consider and try and have a think about the whole life cycle of the product at the end of the day, because I think that's a very important aspect.
Do you think this is kind of off topic, but do you think there's a way to create an eco-friendly urethane? Because you're basically just sanding plastic onto the road, right?
There's not. No.
Or
people try it with water-based urethanes and it just doesn't. I mean, the chemicals that go into actual polyurethane are pretty nasty.
Yeah.
And there's just no way. I mean, it's a byproduct of petroleum. Like that's all there is to it. So you can't really find another way to make it at this point. So it's just, yeah, I mean, you can try and make it as efficient as you can to minimize wastage, and that's something that we definitely take into account. We use every drop. We don't waste a drop of urethane. But yeah.
Okay. Do you believe the current logistics system and organizations in China are capable of shifting to a more sustainably focused model in the future?
I mean, I think things are fairly sustainable here because, I mean, what a lot of people don't understand is, like in China, for example, the delivery systems, everybody uses electric bikes, like electric scooters that have a little tray back. So the way it works with if you get a package, for example, delivered inside of China, it'll say it might be a truck, and they also have electric trucks here. So the truck will take it to a distribution point, and then the little scooters will go and pick up the stuff for the area and then take it directly to the customers. So there are some aspects of like sustainability in that instance, but also when it comes to recycling, like that's a big thing. Everything gets recycled, like literally everything. You see dudes on scooters with like stacks high of cardboard that it's like he takes a turn and he's going to topple over, like that much cardboard. And I mean, that's how people make money. Like you see old cleaning up the street and picking up cardboard to recycle or wooden pallets or whatever. Like you can make money recycling stuff here.
Yep.
And so I think
for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that plays into like logistics and shipping in general, because things are packaged as efficiently as possible, like get them down as small as possible to fit as much into a container or a plane or whatever it is. And so there's a lot of consolidated shipping here, a lot of big companies that do that. So for example, if I want to ship a package to Oz, I can ship it to my forwarder. My forwarder will consolidate that with probably like 100,000 other packages and send them all to Oz, and then hand it off to whoever in Oz, maybe Oz Post or a local courier, and then that will get delivered to the final endpoint of the customer, rather than actually like shipping it, straight to just one package kind of thing. It's a yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we're doing everything you can at the moment, but in terms of things that you can do to improve that, I mean, that would be alternative fuels for planes. I think we're not there yet. I think we're a way off from that point. But we try to be as efficient as we can with shipping. Like for stuff to Europe, for example, I'll ship it by rail.
Yep.
Much more efficient than shipping it by sea or by plane.
Yep.
There's literally the train is just in Guangzhou, so I can
ship quick as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's quickish. It takes like 25 days door to door to Europe, but it's by rail.
That's crazy. Yeah,
pretty efficient. And the cost is kind of in between air and sea. But yeah, I mean, I've shipped a lot of stuff like that. 2-3 tons worth of stuff, and it's got there no problem. But yeah, also like shipping stuff by sea. I mean, sea freight is it's not great for the environment, but it's the best way to move like lots of stuff in from one place to another. You've probably got like 5,000-10,000 containers on one ship rather than just trying to ship one individual thing. So I think that's, but yeah, alternative fuels. I mean, alternative fuels and minimizing waste and getting packaging down as small as possible. I mean, that's really the best things you can do.
I feel like just being conscious of the need for it automatically makes you more sustainable, because you're generally taking those practices within an organization
to an extent.
Yeah. But I mean, like 30-40 years ago, barely anyone was even conscious of like the need for change.
Exactly. I mean, geez, I still remember Macca's in the day had those polystyrene containers. It was just all of this stuff. Things have definitely changed. But yeah, sustainability is something that I think a lot of people still aren't thinking about. But yeah, I think it's you're gonna have to. You're just not gonna have a choice pretty soon.
Even the little Macca's toys. I saw like a Happy Meal toy the other day. Now they're just like little cardboard people.
Yeah,
they don't look very good, to be honest. But
Well, I mean, here they still. I mean, a lot of people don't realize McDonald's is the largest toy company in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, they produce like billions of toys a year. I mean, they still do plastic toys and stuff here. The quality of them is fairly questionable, but you know, when you're making billions of them and giving them away for free, you gotta, you know.
Yeah, sacrifice something.
That's it.
Well, yeah, thank you, Jeremy. It was great to chat to you, and I think you can really give an interesting perspective to a lot of my viewers. I think it's rare that even industrial designers get to communicate in this way with a Chinese manufacturer, and I hope that this podcast has been interesting to some people. Yeah,
Awesome.
thank you.
No worries. All right.